I remember the silence most of all. Not the music stopping, not the whispers rippling through the crowd, not the gasps or the clatter of a dropped glass. No, what I remember is the silence that fell when I took off my veil, turned away from the altar, and walked out of my own wedding. The dress was heavy, the train dragging behind me as if it wanted me to stay, but my legs moved on their own. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, purposeful, final. People shifted in their seats, some standing, some reaching out to stop me, but I didn't look at them. I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on the door, the exit, the light streaming through like a lifeline. I left everything behind in that moment, the flowers, the cake, the vows we'd written, the man waiting at the altar. And I didn't look back. Most people don't understand what it takes to walk away from a wedding, from the day that's supposed to be the happiest of your life. Most people spend years imagining that day, picturing the dress, the music, the way their partner will look at them as they walk down the aisle. And for a long time, I did too. I dreamed about forever, about building a home, about laughter and late-night talks and anniversaries. But that dream shattered with a single piece of information. One cruel, careless bet that revealed everything I needed to know about the man I was about to marry. He bet on our marriage. Not in some playful, joking way. Not with friends teasing or harmless stares. No, he and his buddies had an actual wager going. How long it would last. How long I would put up with him before I broke. How long before I gave up, like I was some project destined to fail. When I found out, it was like being punched in the stomach. The air left my body. My mind spun. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it was a misunderstanding. But the proof was right there, undeniable, cruel in its clarity. And in that moment, I knew. I couldn't marry him. That's why I walked out. But the story doesn't start at the altar. It starts long before, in the slow unraveling of trust one didn't notice until it was too late. We met 3 years earlier at a friend's birthday party. He was charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel seen. He had that easy smile, that quick wit, the way of making you believe you were the only person he wanted to talk to. I was cautious at first, but he pursued me with a persistence that felt flattering, intoxicating even. Our first dates were sweet, full of laughter and shared secrets. He remembered small things I told him, my favorite coffee order, the book I was reading, the way I liked my fries crispy. It felt like he was paying attention in a way no one else had before. And I fell for him. Looking back, I realize I ignored small red flags. The way he sometimes made jokes at my expense in front of his friends. The way he would brush off my concerns with a laugh and a kiss, telling me not to be so sensitive. The way he drank a little too much at parties, growing louder, bolder, meaner. But I told myself no relationship is perfect. I told myself everyone has flaws. And when he was good, he was wonderful. He proposed after 2 years, in a grand gesture at a rooftop restaurant. There were candles, music, applause from strangers when I said yes. I cried tears of joy, believing I was stepping into the future I had always wanted. Planning the wedding was stressful, of course, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. The colors, the flowers, the venue, the dress, I wanted it all to be perfect. I wanted us to be perfect. But in the months leading up to the wedding, little cracks began to show. He grew distant at times, distracted, glued to his phone. He brushed it off when I asked, saying it was just work or stress. I believed him. Until one night, a week before the wedding, when his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I don't know what made me look. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the unease that had been building in me for months. But I picked up his phone, and what I saw changed everything. It was a group chat with his friends. At first, it looked like harmless banter, jokes, memes, the usual. But then I saw my name. I saw messages about me, about us, about our wedding. And then I saw it. The bet. They were laughing, placing wagers like I was some kind of game. 6 months, one said. A year, said another. 2 years if he really played his cards right. And his response, my fiancé, the man I was about to marry, was the worst of all. He wrote that he'd give it 18 months, tops. He said I was too uptight to handle him for longer than that. He joked about how he'd probably get bored first, about how he'd cash in when I finally broke. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking, my stomach twisting. The man I thought loved me, the man I trusted with my future, was mocking me with his friends. Reducing our marriage to a joke, a gamble. I felt sick. When he came out of the shower, I put the phone down and acted like nothing had happened. But inside, I was screaming. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat the next day. I kept replaying those words in my head, trying to reconcile the man I loved with the man who would say something so cruel. I thought about confronting him. I imagined his excuses. He would say it was just a joke, just guys being guys, that it didn't mean anything. Maybe he would even blame me, say I shouldn't have looked at his phone. But none of that mattered. Because even if it was a joke, even if he didn't mean every word, the fact that he said it at all told me everything I needed to know. He didn't respect me. And without respect, there could be no marriage. So I made a decision. I wouldn't marry him. But saying that and doing it were two very different things. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of rehearsals, fittings, family arriving from out of town. Everyone was excited, buzzing with joy, celebrating what they thought was a love story. I smiled, posed for pictures, went through the motions, all while carrying a secret that weighed heavier than my gown. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, dressed in white, my hair perfectly styled, my makeup flawless. I looked like a bride, radiant and ready. But inside, I felt hollow. I thought about the guests waiting, about my parents who had spent so much money, about the expectations of everyone in that room. I thought about the embarrassment, the whispers, the judgment that would follow me if I walked away. But then I thought about the rest of my life. I pictured waking up next to him, knowing what he had said, knowing he didn't believe in us, knowing he was already waiting for me to fail. I pictured anniversaries that would feel like countdowns, arguments that would echo with his friends' laughter. I pictured myself slowly breaking, piece by piece, until I became the version of me he had bet on. And I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. So when the music started and I walked down the aisle, I wasn't walking toward him. I was walking toward my decision. And when I reached the altar, when he smiled at me like nothing was wrong, when the officiant began to speak, I took a deep breath. And I left. When I pushed open the doors of the chapel, the sunlight hit me like a spotlight. My chest heaved, my vision blurred, but I kept walking. My veil fluttered behind me, catching on the door for a second before tearing free. I heard gasps behind me, murmurs rising into a wave of confusion. Someone called my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The parking lot was nearly empty, the cars lined up neatly like nothing unusual was happening inside. I didn't know where I was going, but my body knew it couldn't stay. I yanked up the hem of my dress and started running, the fabric tangling around my legs, my shoes slipping against the pavement. I made it halfway across the lot before I heard footsteps pounding behind me. It was him. "Where are you going?" His voice cracked with shock, maybe even panic. He caught up quickly, his hand grabbing my arm, spinning me around. His face was flushed, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes darting back toward the church like he was afraid of being seen. I jerked my arm away. My voice shook, but the words came out sharper than I expected. "I know." His brow furrowed. "Know what?" I stared at him, and for a second I almost faltered. This was the man I had loved, the man I had said yes to, the man who had once made me feel cherished. But then I saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the shift in his posture, the way he didn't look surprised so much as caught. "I know about the bet," I said, my voice breaking. "About how long you think I'll last. About how you and your friends laugh about me behind my back." His face drained of color. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then he shook his head, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. It was a joke. That's all it was. You're overreacting. The words hit me like fire. A joke. Overreacting. The same script he had always used when he crossed a line. But this wasn't just a careless comment. This was our future. This was my life. My throat tightened, tears burning behind my eyes. You don't respect me. You never did. And I won't marry someone who thinks I'm just a game to win or lose. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if that would soften the blow. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Everyone's inside waiting for us. Our families, our friends. You're going to ruin everything over nothing? Nothing. He called it nothing. My hands curled into fists at my sides, the lace of my dress scratching against my skin. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see the damage he had done. But instead, I stepped back. I'm not the one who ruined it, I whispered. You are. And with that, I turned and walked away again. This time, he didn't follow. The hours after that blurred into chaos. I don't even remember exactly how I got home. I just remember the looks, the stunned faces of guests as I passed, the whispers, the half-hearted attempts from relatives to stop me. My mother's voice calling my name, sharp with disbelief, but I couldn't bear to turn around. By the time I reached the safety of my room, I was shaking so badly I could barely breathe. My dress felt like a cage, suffocating, heavy with shame and heartbreak. I ripped it off, leaving it in a heap on the floor, and curled into myself on the bed. That's when the tears came. Hot, unstoppable, gut-wrenching sobs that racked my whole body. I cried for the girl who had believed in love, who had dreamed of forever, who had ignored the warning signs because she wanted so badly to believe in him. I cried for the embarrassment, for the whispers I knew were spreading already, for the judgment that would follow me. But most of all, I cried for the betrayal. Because it wasn't just about the bet. It was about what it revealed, that he didn't see me as a partner, as someone to cherish, as someone to build a life with. He saw me as a challenge, a temporary distraction, a joke. And I deserved more than that. The phone calls started almost immediately. My mother first, her voice sharp and furious, demanding I explain myself. How could I embarrass the family like this? How could I throw everything away over something so small? I couldn't even answer her. My throat closed up, my chest tightening with every word. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I had made that choice. She only cared about appearances, about reputation, about what people would think. Then came my father, softer, but still disappointed. He wanted to understand, but when I told him about the bet, he sighed, as if it were some childish thing I should have brushed aside. Men joke, sweetheart. Don't let it ruin your life. But it wasn't just a joke. And it wasn't my life it ruined, it was the illusion of love I thought I had. The hardest call was from him. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone buzzed with his name. My hands shook as I answered, not sure if I wanted closure or if I just needed to hear his voice one last time. He sounded desperate, not charming, not confident, not the man who had once swept me off my feet. His voice cracked as he begged me to reconsider, to come back, to fix what I had broken. He swore it was nothing, that he loved me, that he had just gotten caught up in stupid guy talk. For a second, I almost believed him. My heart wanted to, my memories wanted to. But then I remembered the messages, the laughter, the way he had dismissed my pain in the parking lot. Love without respect isn't love. And so I told him no. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought he had hung up. But then his voice came back, sharp and cold. He called me dramatic. He called me heartless. He said no one would ever love me the way he did, as if his version of love was the best I could hope for. And then he hung up. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. The story spread quickly, whispered at family dinners, shared in group chats, dissected on social media. Some people admired me for walking away. Others mocked me, said I was foolish, said I had ruined my chance at happiness. I tried not to listen, but the voices seeped in. At night, alone in my room, I replayed everything, wondering if I had made a mistake. What if they were right? What if I had overreacted? What if I had just thrown away the best thing I'd ever have? But then I remembered the girl standing in the church, veil heavy on her head, heart breaking in her chest. I remembered the strength it took to walk away, the clarity that burned through the fog of fear. And I knew, deep down, that I had done the right thing. Because marriage isn't about the dress, or the cake, or the perfect photos. It isn't about making everyone else happy. It's about building a life with someone who respects you, who believes in you, who sees you as their equal. And he wasn't that man. He never was. In the months that followed, I started over. Slowly, painfully, but with purpose. I went to therapy, where I unpacked not just the wedding but the patterns I had ignored, the parts of myself I had silenced. I leaned on friends who reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that my pain was valid, that my choice was brave. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing sooner, for loving someone who didn't truly love me back. And little by little, I found myself again. The first week after leaving the wedding felt like I was living in a fog. I couldn't tell the difference between morning and night, between sleeping and waking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the church, the shocked faces, his pale expression when I confronted him. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and left empty. The wedding dress sat crumpled in the corner of my room, still stained with dust from the parking lot. I couldn't bring myself to hang it up or pack it away. It was like a ghost haunting me, a reminder of the life I had almost stepped into. Sometimes I would stare at it for so long that my vision blurred, as if I could erase everything by just willing it to disappear. But the dress wasn't the problem. The problem was the voice in my head, whispering that maybe I had made a mistake. That maybe walking away had been too drastic. That maybe I had ruined my only chance at happiness. I hated that voice. I hated how loud it was, how convincing it sounded at 3 a.m. when the world was quiet and my chest ached with loneliness. Still, even in my weakest moments, I remembered the truth. I remembered the messages, the laughter, the arrogance in his voice when he told me I was overreacting. I remembered how he grabbed my arm in the parking lot like he owned me, how his words stung more than any physical pain ever could. That memory was my anchor. A few days later, my best friend, Lily, showed up at my door. She didn't call, she didn't text, she just arrived with takeout bags and a look in her eyes that told me she wasn't going to let me drown. I opened the door in the same pajamas I'd been wearing for days, my hair knotted, my face blotchy from crying. She didn't flinch. She just walked in, set the food on the table, and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't realize how much I needed that hug until I broke down right there in the doorway. Lily held me while I sobbed, and when I finally pulled away, she just nodded like she understood everything without me saying a word. "You're not alone," she said softly. "I'm here. And I'm not leaving." We spent that night eating greasy food on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since the wedding, I laughed. It was small and shaky, but it was real. And it reminded me that life wasn't over just because one man had proven himself unworthy. Therapy came next. It wasn't easy to admit that I needed it, that I couldn't untangle the mess in my head on my own. But I knew I had to try. The first session was awkward. I sat there, fidgeting with my hands, unsure of what to say. But the words spilled out anyway. The therapist listened quietly, never interrupting, just letting me pour out the anger, the shame, the fear. Over time, those sessions became a lifeline. I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before, the way I ignored red flags because I was afraid of being alone, the way I bent over backwards to keep the peace while sacrificing my own needs. It was painful, like digging glass shards out of a wound. But with each session, I felt a little lighter, a little clearer. Of course, the outside world wasn't as gentle. People talked. They always do. Some were supportive, sending me messages, telling me I was brave. Others weren't so kind. They whispered that I had cold feet, that I was too dramatic, that I had embarrassed everyone for no reason. Some even said I should have forgiven and forgotten because no relationship is perfect. Those words stung, but they also fueled me. Every cruel comment reminded me of why I had walked away, because I refused to spend the rest of my life justifying disrespect, minimizing betrayal, swallowing pain for the sake of appearances. I deserved more than that. One evening, about a month after the wedding, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not happy, not healed, but calm. I thought about the girl who had stood at the altar, veil heavy on her head, heart pounding in her chest. I thought about the courage it took to turn away, to choose myself over the fairy tale ending everyone expected. And for the first time, I felt proud of her. Proud of me. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong, ready to face the world again. Other days I crumbled, unable to get out of bed, haunted by the weight of what I had lost. But little by little, the good days started to outnumber the bad. I went back to old hobbies, painting, reading, walking in the park. I surrounded myself with people who reminded me of my worth, who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. I allowed myself to dream again, not about marriage or romance, but about the life I wanted for me. And slowly, I started to believe that happiness was still possible. Not because of someone else, but because of me. One afternoon, Lily and I were walking downtown when we passed a small boutique. In the window, there was a wedding dress on display, sleek, simple, nothing like the one I had worn. For a moment, my chest tightened. The old ache returned, the memory of the dress crumpled in my room, the vows I never spoke. But then, something shifted. Instead of sadness, I felt relief. Relief that I hadn't tied myself to someone who didn't deserve me. Relief that I had the chance to rewrite my story. I smiled, surprising even myself. Lily noticed and nudged me playfully. "What's that look for?" I shrugged, a small laugh escaping. "I think I'm finally okay." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't lying. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day I'll fall in love again. Maybe I won't. But I do know this, I will never again settle for less than respect. I will never again ignore the voice inside me that whispers when something is wrong. I will never again let someone else define my worth. Walking away from that wedding was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the bravest. Because sometimes, the most powerful I do is the one you say to yourself. The months after the wedding stretched into a strange mix of emptiness and discovery. There were still nights when I woke up shaking, replaying the sound of laughter as those men bet on my marriage like it was a horse race. But there were also mornings when I opened my curtains, felt the sunlight on my face, and realized I could breathe freely for the first time in years. At first, I buried myself in work. My job became the distraction I desperately needed. Deadlines kept me busy, and meetings gave me structure. My coworkers whispered, of course, they had all heard the story by now, but no one dared to ask me directly. I preferred it that way. I wasn't ready to explain myself, not to them, not to anyone. Instead, I explained myself to my journal. Each night I would sit at my desk, pen scratching across the page, pouring out everything I was too afraid to say aloud. My anger, my shame, my loneliness, my moments of hope. Some nights the pages were stained with tears, other nights they were covered in doodles and fragments of half-formed dreams. But over time, those journals became proof of my survival. Around the 3-month mark, something shifted. I was walking through the park, earbuds in, when I realized I was smiling at nothing in particular. Just smiling. The trees were bright with autumn colors, and a group of kids were playing tag near the fountain. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a flicker of joy that wasn't forced, wasn't borrowed from someone else's presence. It was mine. I went home that evening and signed up for a painting class at the community center. I hadn't painted since college, but something in me craved color, creation, expression. The first night of class, I sat nervously at a long table surrounded by strangers, staring at the blank canvas in front of me. My hands shook as I dipped the brush into blue paint and dragged it across the surface. And just like that, the dam broke. The more I painted, the more I realized how much I had silenced myself over the years. I had shrunk to fit inside the version of me that made him comfortable, that made my mother proud, that didn't make waves. But here, with paint under my fingernails and splatters on my jeans, I felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I had forgotten existed. Of course, just as I was finding my footing, he came back. One Saturday morning, I was walking out of a cafe with a book in my hand when I saw him leaning against his car across the street. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. My stomach flipped, and my feet froze. But then he lifted his hand in a half-wave, and my heart lurched. I could have walked away. I should have walked away. But curiosity pulled me across the street. He looked older somehow, though only months had passed. His eyes darted nervously, and for once, he didn't have that smug, untouchable confidence. "I just want to talk," he said, voice low. Every muscle in my body tensed. I wanted to scream at him, to ask how dare he show his face after what he had done. But instead, I crossed my arms and waited. He stumbled through an apology, words tumbling out like he hadn't rehearsed them enough. He said it was a mistake, a stupid joke, something he never thought would hurt me. He said he missed me. He said he wanted another chance. For a long time, I just stood there, letting his words hang in the air. Once, they might have shattered me. Once, I might have believed them, might have let the cycle begin again. But now, I felt nothing. When he finished, I took a slow breath. "You bet on my life," I said quietly. "On my love. On my worth. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." The silence between us was heavy. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with power. I didn't look back. That moment became a turning point. Saying no, out loud, to his face, it was like cutting the last thread that tied me to him. I went home that day and took the crumpled wedding dress out of my closet. For months, I couldn't bear to touch it. But now, I packed it into a box, sealed it shut, and carried it to the donation center. As I watched the clerk wheel it away, I felt a strange sense of release. The dress was never really mine, not the way it should have been. It had belonged to an illusion, to a version of life that no longer existed. Letting it go was letting myself go, too. By the 6-month mark, people stopped whispering about the wedding. My story faded from gossip, replaced by someone else's scandal. I was grateful for that. The quiet gave me room to rebuild without everyone's eyes on me. I focused on therapy, on art, on friendships. I traveled for the first time alone, a weekend trip to the coast, where I walked barefoot on the sand and wrote postcards to myself. "You're still here," I scribbled on one. "You're still breathing." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, but it was healing. And slowly, I began to imagine a future again. Not one defined by a husband or a white dress, but one defined by me, my choices, my passions, my peace. Looking back now, I realize the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. Walking away from him gave me back my voice, my strength, my freedom. Sometimes I still wonder what my life would look like if I had stayed. If I had smiled through the pain, whispered "I do," and pretended everything was fine. I know the answer, though. I would have been trapped in a marriage built on lies, on mockery, on disrespect. And I would have lost myself completely. Instead, I chose me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding, that wasn't crept up on me quietly. I hadn't been keeping track of dates, but when the day arrived, I woke with a strange heaviness in my chest. For hours, I tried to ignore it, distracting myself with errands, chores, and even cleaning the bathroom just to avoid sitting still with the thought. But by evening, as the sky turned violet outside my window, I couldn't run anymore. I curled up on the couch with a blanket and let the memories wash over me. This time, though, the memories didn't break me. I remembered the shock on people's faces when I walked out. The sting of betrayal when I learned the truth. The raw humiliation of being the woman who left her own wedding. But I also remembered the strength in my legs as I walked down that aisle, this time in the opposite direction. I remembered the way my chest rose and fell as I breathed through the panic, how my voice didn't falter when I told him no. And for the first time, I saw that moment not as an ending, but as a beginning. I celebrated quietly. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and whispered a toast to the girl who chose herself. To the woman she was becoming. That night, I wrote in my journal, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ruin the picture-perfect moment everyone else wants for you. Those words stayed with me. The next few months unfolded like chapters of a book I hadn't expected to write. I applied for a new position at work, one I never would have considered before. It was a leadership role, with more responsibility, more visibility, more risk. A year ago, I would have told myself I wasn't ready, that I should stay small, stay safe. But now, I remembered what it felt like to stand up for myself, and I thought, why not? When I got the promotion, I cried. Not because of the title or the pay raise, but because I realized how far I had come. I had walked away from a man who gambled with my worth, and now I was stepping into a role where my voice mattered. Where my choices mattered. Where I mattered. Art continued to be my sanctuary. My little apartment slowly filled with canvases, abstract swirls of color, landscapes of places I wanted to visit, even messy portraits that barely resembled people but captured emotion better than words ever could. One afternoon, my painting instructor pulled me aside. She told me about a small local gallery looking for emerging artists to feature in a group show. At first, I laughed. The idea of anyone wanting to display my messy, emotional work felt absurd. But she insisted, and something in me, the part that had learned to take chances again, said yes. The night of the exhibit, I stood nervously in the gallery, clutching a glass of cheap champagne, watching strangers study my paintings. One woman lingered in front of a piece I had called Unbroken, her eyes glistening as she leaned closer. I wanted to ask her what she saw, but I didn't. Instead, I let her have her moment, the same way art had given me mine. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing pieces of myself I had once buried, about letting the world see me and not apologizing for it. Every so often, my ex tried to creep back into my life. A message on social media. A text from an unknown number. Once, even a letter slipped under my apartment door. The old me might have felt tempted to respond, to demand answers, to cling to the hope of closure. But I had learned something important: closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from you. So I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I didn't give him the power of a response. Instead, I turned each attempt into fuel, proof that he could see what he had lost, proof that I had been right to leave. Proof that he no longer controlled me. By the second anniversary, I felt like a different person. I wasn't completely healed. Trauma doesn't vanish just because you want it to, but I was stronger. Softer with myself. Clearer about what I deserved. I marked the day not with sadness, but with celebration. I booked a solo trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed about but never dared to do. For 2 weeks, I wandered cobblestone streets, ate gelato by the fountain, painted sketches of the Tuscan countryside, and sat in quiet churches where no one knew my name. And in that solitude, I realized something beautiful: I was no longer afraid of being alone. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, leaving the wedding, choosing the harder road, facing the whispers and the loneliness. My answer is always the same: I regret nothing. Because what I gained was priceless. I gained freedom. I gained respect, for myself, from others. I gained the chance to build a life on my own terms, not on a bet, not on someone else's fragile ego. Most of all, I gained me. Today, when I look back, I don't see the broken woman curled in bed with mascara-streaked cheeks. I don't see the girl humiliated at the altar. I see a woman who stood in the face of betrayal and chose courage. Walking away from that wedding was the hardest decision of my life, but it was also the best one. And if I could leave you with one thing, it's this: sometimes the bravest love story is the one you write for yourself.